The notification sound pierced through my Tuesday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m. I was standing in my corner office on the 32nd floor, watching Seattle's skyline blur through floor-to-ceiling windows when my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. The message preview made my stomach drop like I'd just stepped off a cliff. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Application received. Madison Wells, Senior Marketing Director position. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, ceramic shattering against Italian marble, dark liquid spreading across financial reports I'd been reviewing. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Because Madison Wells wasn't just any applicant, Madison Wells was my sister. My sister, who, just 3 weeks ago, had called my career a dead-end joke, and told our entire family I was wasting my life playing office. My name is Angelica Wells, and I'm the founder and CEO of Meridian Digital Solutions, a company I built from nothing into a $45 million enterprise. But my family doesn't know that. To them, I'm still the girl who disappeared into some tech nonsense 5 years ago and never talks about work. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and opened the full application. There she was, Madison's professional headshot staring back at me, that same confident smile she'd worn 3 weeks ago when she destroyed me at our parents' anniversary dinner. The same smile she'd had when she announced her promotion at Goldman Sachs, when she bragged about her Manhattan penthouse, when she looked me dead in the eye and said, "At least I'm not stuck in some entry-level position at 32, Angie." The irony was suffocating. Madison had spent years climbing corporate ladders, earning her MBA from Wharton, networking at country club events, building what she called a real career. She measured success in designer handbags and corner offices with city views. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly building an empire she couldn't even fathom. I scrolled through her resume, each line a memory of every time she'd made me feel small. Columbia University, summa cum laude. Goldman Sachs, Vice President of Strategic Marketing. Previous salary, $285,000. The same salary she'd flaunted at Christmas dinner, making sure everyone heard how she'd finally made it to 6 figures, while shooting glances at me like I was a charity case. But here's what she didn't know. What none of them knew. The dead-end tech job she mocked was actually me running board meetings with Fortune 500 executives. The little computer work she dismissed was me signing contracts worth millions. The entry-level position she pitied was me employing over 300 people across 4 offices. My assistant knocked and entered, carefully stepping around the broken mug. "Ms. Wells, your 10 a.m. is here. Also, I noticed we received a high-priority application for the marketing director role. Should I schedule the preliminary screening?" I stared at Madison's photo one more time. That perfectly styled blonde hair, those sharp blue eyes that had always looked at me like I was disappointing, the power suit that screamed success in a language our family understood. She wanted to work for me. She wanted to work for the sister she'd spent years treating like a failure. "Not yet, Sarah. I need some time with this one." After Sarah left, I walked to my wall of accolades. Industry awards, photos with tech leaders, magazine covers featuring young entrepreneurs reshaping business. None of these had ever made it to family dinners. How could they, when Madison commanded every conversation with stories of client dinners and corporate retreats? I remembered the exact moment everything crystallized at our parents' anniversary party. We were standing in the garden of their Bellevue home, surrounded by relatives and family friends, when Uncle Robert asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Madison swooped in with her practiced laugh. "Oh, Angelica's doing some computer stuff in the city. Very technical." She'd said technical like it was a foreign disease. I keep telling her she should consider going back to school, getting into real business. I could probably get her an entry-level position at Goldman if she ever decides to get serious about her career. The entire circle had nodded sympathetically, like I was some lost cause who needed guidance. Aunt Patricia actually patted my arm and said, "It's never too late to start over, honey." Start over. As if the company I'd built from my studio apartment, the company that now occupied 2 floors of a downtown Seattle high-rise, was just a phase 1 needed to outgrow. I stood there in my simple black dress, no designer label visible, no luxury watch catching the light, and let them pity me. Let Madison paint me as the underachiever, while she glowed in her success, Because how do you explain that you've been featured in Forbes without sounding like you're bragging? How do you mention your company's valuation without seeming desperate for validation? So I'd smiled politely and changed the subject, like I always did. Like I'd been doing for 5 years, watching my family celebrate Madison's achievements while remaining completely oblivious to mine. They knew I worked in tech, they knew I lived comfortably, but they had no idea I was the Angelica Wells, who'd been profiled in Business Insider as the quiet genius behind Seattle's fastest-growing digital agency. The morning sun shifted, casting new shadows across my office as I pulled up Madison's LinkedIn profile. 500 connections, all very impressive, all very traditional corporate. Her latest post was from 2 weeks ago, grateful for another successful quarter at Goldman Sachs. Hard work and dedication always pay off. 43 likes, 12 comments of congratulations. My latest post, from the same day, had simply read, "Excited to announce Meridian's expansion into the Portland market." 800 likes, over 100 comments, including congratulations from CEOs and industry leaders Madison would never dream of accessing. But of course, she wasn't connected to me on LinkedIn. Why would she be? In her mind, I was just her little sister playing with computers. Bo. I thought about the interview process ahead. How Madison would walk into my building, past the reception area with our company name in steel letters, past the walls showcasing our client success stories, past the open workspace where my teams collaborated on million-dollar campaigns. How she'd sit across from me, probably in one of her power suits, ready to impress some hiring manager she'd never imagined could be me. The application indicated she was looking for a new challenge and wanted to, quote, transition into the dynamic world of digital marketing. Dynamic world. As if she was doing me a favor by considering my industry worthy of her attention. Her cover letter, which I now opened with morbid curiosity, was a masterpiece of condescension disguised as enthusiasm. While my background is in traditional finance, I believe my strategic thinking and proven track record of success would translate beautifully into the digital space. I'm excited to bring my high-level experience to help grow what I understand is a promising mid-sized company. Promising mid-sized company. I almost laughed. Meridian Digital Solutions had more revenue last quarter than Madison made in 3 years. We'd just signed a contract with Microsoft that was worth more than her entire department's annual budget. But to her, we were still just a promising little company that would be lucky to have someone of her caliber. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Madison's so excited about this new opportunity. She said she's interviewing with some tech company in Seattle. Maybe you two can finally connect over work stuff. Connect over work stuff. If only she knew. I set the phone down and walked to my window, looking out at the city I'd conquered while my family wasn't paying attention. Somewhere out there, Madison was probably preparing for what she assumed would be a standard interview with a standard company. She was probably researching our website, preparing to dazzle some middle manager with her Goldman Sachs credentials and her Ivy League education. She had no idea she was about to walk into the kingdom of the sister she'd dismissed as a failure. The broken coffee mug lay scattered across my floor, like pieces of my old self, the version of me who used to absorb Madison's criticism and wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe I should have chosen a more traditional path. Maybe success only counted if your family could understand it at dinner parties. But standing in my office, surrounded by the empire I'd built in silence, I realized something profound. I wasn't angry about Madison's application. I wasn't hurt by her years of condescension. I was something much more dangerous. It was curious. Curious to see what happened when someone who'd spent 5 years underestimating me suddenly needed something I controlled. Curious to watch Madison navigate a world where her pedigree meant nothing and her assumptions about success were about to crumble. Curious to discover who she really was when the power dynamic shifted so completely that her reality would have to reorganize itself around a truth she'd never considered. The sister she'd pitied was about to interview her for a job. The career she'd mocked was about to determine her future. The dead end she'd dismissed was about to become her lifeline. And I was about to find out just how much family loyalty was worth when it came with a $45 million price tag. 3 days after Madison's application hit my desk, my phone rang during my lunch break. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Madison Wells. I hadn't heard from her since the anniversary disaster, and suddenly she was calling me? This couldn't be a coincidence. Hey, Angie. Her voice was unusually bright, almost musical. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Are you free to chat for a few minutes? I leaned back in my office chair, watching the Seattle harbor through my window. This was going to be interesting. Sure, Madison. What's going on? Well, I have some exciting news. I'm actually exploring opportunities in Seattle. I know you work in tech there, and I was wondering if you might have any insights about the market. Insights about the market. I almost choked on my sparkling water. I had insights, all right. I had insights like a fisherman has insights about the ocean. What kind of opportunities are you looking at? I kept my voice carefully neutral. Digital marketing, actually. It's such a growing field, and I think my experience in strategic finance could really translate well. I've been talking to a few companies, but there's one in particular that seems promising. Meridian Digital Solutions? Have you heard of them? The silence that followed wasn't intentional. I literally couldn't form words. Madison was calling me, her failure sister, with the dead-end job, asking if I'd heard of my own company. Angie, are you still there? Yeah, sorry. Meridian Digital, you said? Exactly. They seem like a really solid, mid-sized firm. Growing fast, good reputation. I have an interview scheduled for next week, and I was hoping you might know someone there who could give me the inside scoop. You know how these tech companies can be so informal. I want to make sure I'm prepared for their culture. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Their culture. I was their culture. I had literally written the employee handbook she was probably researching right now. What makes you think I'd know anyone there? Madison laughed, and there it was. That familiar edge of condescension wrapped in sisterly affection. Come on, Angie. You've been in the Seattle tech scene for years. I'm sure you've networked around. Plus, you always were good with the technical stuff. I thought maybe you'd crossed paths with them professionally. Crossed paths professionally. I was tempted to tell her I'd crossed paths with them every morning when I walked into the building I owned, but something held me back. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the realization that Madison was about to reveal exactly who she thought I was, and more importantly, who she thought she was. Tell me more about why you're interested in them specifically, I said instead. Well, their growth trajectory is impressive for a company their size. They've got some major clients, decent revenue projections. The position they're offering is Senior Marketing Director, which would be perfect for my background. Honestly, I think I could really help them scale up. These smaller tech firms often lack the sophisticated strategic thinking that comes from traditional corporate experience. I had to put the phone on mute for a moment to keep from laughing out loud. Sophisticated strategic thinking. Madison was planning to bring sophisticated strategic thinking to the company that had just signed a 3-year contract with Amazon Web Services, the company that had been featured in Harvard Business Review for its innovative client acquisition strategies. Sounds like you're really excited about the opportunity, I managed. I am. And honestly, it would be nice to finally have something in common with you work-wise. I mean, I know your job is more on the technical side, but at least we'd both be in tech. Mom and Dad would love that. Their daughter's finally in the same industry. Finally in the same industry. As if I hadn't been pioneering digital marketing strategies while she was still learning how to navigate office politics at Goldman Sachs. Madison, can I ask you something? Of course. What do you actually know about my job? Another laugh, lighter this time, but still carrying that familiar hint of dismissal. Well, you're always so secretive about it. I know you do something with computers and websites. Programming, maybe? Or like, IT support? You work for some company downtown, right? You never really talk about family stuff. Some company downtown. I closed my eyes and counted to 5. She thought I was in IT support. After 5 years of building an empire, my own sister thought I fixed computers for a living. And what made you decide to reach out to me specifically about Meridian? Honestly, I'm a little nervous. I know I'm incredibly qualified, but this would be my first move outside traditional finance. I figured if anyone would understand what it's like to be underestimated in tech, it would be you. You've probably had to work twice as hard to prove yourself in a male-dominated industry. The irony was suffocating. Madison was asking for advice about being underestimated from the sister she'd been underestimating for half a decade. She was seeking career guidance from someone she thought was in IT support. What exactly are you nervous about? Well, the salary range they mentioned is actually lower than what I'm used to. I mean, I'm making close to $300,000 at Goldman, and this position maxes out around $180,000. But I figure it's worth the pay cut for the growth potential. And honestly, the work-life balance in tech seems so much better than finance. I'm tired of the 80-hour weeks. $180,000. She was nervous about a pay cut to a salary that was probably more than some of my junior employees made, but nowhere near what a senior marketing director actually earned at Meridian. Had she even researched the position properly? Or was she just assuming that because it wasn't Goldman Sachs, it must pay less? Have you looked into their compensation structure pretty thoroughly? As much as I could. These smaller companies aren't always transparent about their full packages, but I'm sure I can negotiate something reasonable. I mean, they'd be lucky to get someone with my background and connections. They'd be lucky. Madison thought Meridian Digital Solutions would be lucky to hire her. The same Madison who had never run a digital campaign, never managed a cross-platform marketing strategy, never dealt with the unique challenges of scaling a tech company in a competitive market. Speaking of background, I said carefully, what do you know about digital marketing specifically? How hard can it be, right? Marketing is marketing. I've been doing strategic analysis and client relations at Goldman for years. Digital just means doing it online instead of in person. Plus, I have an MBA from Wharton. I'm sure I can figure out the technical stuff as I go. How hard can it be? Digital just means doing it online. I felt something shift inside me, like a door closing on whatever remained of my patience with Madison's assumptions. Madison, can I give you some advice? Please. That's exactly why I called. Do more research. A lot more research. Digital marketing isn't just traditional marketing, but online. It's a completely different discipline, with its own analytics, its own customer journey mapping, its own technology stack. The companies that are succeeding in this space aren't the ones treating it like traditional marketing with computers. There was a pause. When Madison spoke again, her voice had a slight edge. I appreciate the concern, Angie, but I think you might be overcomplicating it. I've been doing strategic marketing at the highest levels for years. The fundamentals are the same, whether you're dealing with digital platforms or traditional channels. The fundamentals are the same. I thought about my team's latest campaign for a biotech startup, how we'd used machine learning algorithms to optimize ad spend across 17 different platforms, how we'd created personalized user journeys based on behavioral data that updated in real time. I thought about the 3 patents Meridian held for our proprietary analytics tools. You're probably right, I said. I'm sure your experience will transfer perfectly. Exactly. And honestly, it'll be nice to be in a more relaxed environment. I imagine these tech companies are pretty laid back compared to Goldman. Probably casual dress codes, flexible hours, less pressure. It'll be almost like a vacation while I figure out my next big move. Less pressure. Madison was expecting Meridian to be less pressured than Goldman Sachs. She was expecting a vacation. Meanwhile, my teams regularly worked on campaigns with budgets larger than some small countries' GDPs, where a single strategic mistake could cost millions and destroy relationships with Fortune 100 clients. When did you say your interview was? Next Tuesday at 2. I'm flying on Monday night, staying at the Four Seasons downtown. Actually, maybe we could grab dinner on Monday? It would be fun to catch up, and you could give me more of the local perspective. Dinner the night before her interview, where she'd probably spend 2 hours telling me how nervous she was about this little tech company while sitting across from the person who built it. I'd love to, but I might have work stuff. You know how it is? Of course. I forgot you're still in that grind phase of your career. Don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to hang out once I'm living in Seattle. It'll be like old times. Old times. When she'd boss me around and I'd let her. When she'd made decisions for both of us, and I'd gone along with them. When she'd defined success, and I'd measured myself against her definition. Madison, one more question. What would you do if you didn't get this job? Honestly, I'm not worried about it. I mean, look at my resume. Columbia, Goldman Sachs, proven track record of success. Plus, I have the personal touch that these tech companies often lack. I think they'll be impressed by what I bring to the table. And if they weren't? A longer pause this time. Well, there are other opportunities. I'm sure something will work out. Worst case scenario, I could always go back to finance. It's not like this is make or break for me. Not make or break. Madison was treating this interview, this position at my company, like a casual experiment. Like she was doing us a favor by considering us worthy of her time. Angie, you've been really helpful. I feel so much more confident about this whole thing. And who knows? Maybe if things work out, I could put in a good word for you somewhere. I'm sure there are positions at Meridian that would be perfect for your skill set. Maybe something in their IT department? Something in their IT department. Madison was already planning to help me get a job at my own company. That's really thoughtful of you, Madison. Of course, that's what sisters are for. We look out for each other. After we hung up, I sat in my office staring at the phone like it was evidence of a crime. Madison hadn't just revealed her assumptions about me, about my career, about the company I'd built. She'd revealed something much more fundamental. She had absolutely no idea who I was. To her, I was still the little sister who needed guidance, who worked some vague technical job, who would benefit from her connections and advice. She was flying to Seattle to interview at my company while planning to help me get a job there. The interview was in 6 days. In 6 days, Madison would walk into my building, sit in my conference room, and try to convince me to hire her while having no idea she was talking to me. I pulled up her interview schedule. 2 o'clock next Tuesday. Conference room A, the one with the view of Elliott Bay. The same room where I'd closed the Microsoft deal, where I'd negotiated our partnership with Adobe, where I'd built the relationships that made Meridian what it was today. But first, I had 6 days to decide exactly how I wanted this confrontation to unfold. 6 days to choose between mercy and justice, between protecting her feelings and protecting my own dignity. 6 days to figure out what Madison's sophisticated strategic thinking was really worth when it came face to face with the sister she'd never bothered to actually know. Monday morning arrived with the weight of decision. I'd spent the weekend running through scenarios, each one more tempting than the last. Part of me wanted to call Madison and reveal everything before her interview, to spare us both the theatrical mess of pretending we didn't know each other. But as I sat in my office at 7 a.m., reviewing her application one more time, I realized something crucial. This wasn't about Madison anymore. This was about every time someone had underestimated me, dismissed my achievements, or assumed my success was somehow less valid because it didn't fit their definition. I picked up my phone and called my assistant Sarah. "Can you come in early today? I need to make some changes to tomorrow's interview schedule." Within 20 minutes, Sarah was at my desk with her tablet and that focused expression she wore when she knew something big was happening. Sarah had been with me since the early days, when Meridian was just 12 employees crammed into a rented space in Capitol Hill. She'd watched me build this company from nothing, had fielded calls from journalists wanting to interview the mysterious CEO, had seen me navigate everything from hostile takeovers attempts to industry awards ceremonies. If anyone understood the significance of Madison's application, it would be her. "What exactly are we changing about the Wells interview?" she asked, stylus poised over her screen. "Everything. First, I want you to clear my entire afternoon's schedule for tomorrow, cancel the board prep meeting, move the client review to Wednesday, and reschedule my call with the Portland team." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "Should I let them know why, or just cite scheduling conflicts?" "Scheduling conflicts. Second, I want you to coordinate with HR and make sure every aspect of this interview follows our standard protocol. No shortcuts, no special accommodations. I want Madison Wells to experience exactly what every other candidate experiences. Understood. Anything else?" I stood and walked to my window, watching the morning commute stream through downtown Seattle. From up here, the people looked like pieces in a complex game, each moving according to rules they thought they understood. "Yes. I want you to prepare a complete company overview presentation. Not the abbreviated version we usually do for senior-level candidates. The full presentation. Revenue figures, client portfolio, growth projections, organizational structure, everything." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could feel her calculating the implications. Ms. Wells, may I ask if there's something specific about this candidate that requires additional preparation? I turned back to face her. Sarah had earned the right to ask direct questions, and I respected her enough to give an honest answer. This candidate has some misconceptions about our company that need to be clarified. I see. And will you be conducting the interview personally? That was the million-dollar question. Standard protocol would have Madison interviewed by David Chen, our VP of Marketing, along with Jennifer Rodriguez from HR. I usually only participated in C-level interviews or when we were hiring for positions that reported directly to me. But this wasn't a standard situation. Yes, I'll be leading the interview team. Sarah nodded and made notes on her tablet. Should I inform Mr. Chen and Ms. Rodriguez that you'll be taking point? Please. And Sarah? I want this interview recorded. Full video, not just audio notes. For training purposes? Something like that. After Sarah left, I spent the next hour doing something I hadn't done in years. I prepared for an interview like my job depended on it. Not because I was nervous about my performance, but because I wanted to ensure that every moment of Madison's experience was deliberately crafted. I pulled up our standard interview packet and went through each section methodically. Company history, mission statement, client testimonials, growth metrics. These were facts Madison could have researched if she'd taken the position seriously. But based on our phone conversation, I was fairly certain she'd done the bare minimum. The company history section was particularly interesting to review. It detailed Meridian's founding 5 years ago by, quote, visionary entrepreneur Angelica Wells, our evolution from a boutique digital agency to a full-service marketing powerhouse, our acquisition of 2 smaller firms, and our expansion into the Portland and San Francisco markets. There was even a timeline showing major milestones: our first $1 million contract, our first industry award, our first appearance in national media. How had Madison missed all of this? How had she applied for a senior position at a company without knowing who owned it? The answer, I realized, was that she'd approached this opportunity the same way she approached everything else, with the assumption that her credentials would speak for themselves and that the details would sort themselves out later. I called David Chen to brief him on the interview changes. David had been with Meridian for 3 years, hired away from a major advertising firm in Los Angeles. He was brilliant, diplomatic, and had a particular talent for asking questions that revealed character alongside competence. Angelica, I have to ask, David said after I'd explained the situation. Why are we putting this much energy into what seems like a fairly standard marketing director interview? Because this interview is going to tell us a lot about how people perceive our company and about the kinds of assumptions candidates make when they don't do their homework. Fair enough. Should I prepare any specific questions or stick to the standard portfolio? I thought about this carefully. Stick to standard questions, but I want you to pay particular attention to her answers about digital marketing strategy and her understanding of our client base. Ask her to walk through how she'd approach a campaign for one of our major accounts. Which account should I reference? Microsoft. David was quiet for a moment. You want me to ask a candidate from traditional finance to strategize a campaign for our biggest client? I want to see what happens when someone who thinks digital marketing is, quote, just marketing but online, tries to tackle a real challenge. Got it. This should be interesting. Next, I called Jennifer Rodriguez in HR. Jennifer had been instrumental in developing our company culture, our hiring practices, and our employee development programs. She had a gift for reading people and a low tolerance for candidates who tried to coast on credentials rather than competence. Jennifer, I want you to walk Madison Wells through our entire onboarding presentation during her interview tomorrow. Not the highlighted version, the complete overview, including the executive team profiles, especially the executive team profiles. Angelica, that section includes your biography, your photo, your educational background, and your industry recognition. If this candidate knows you personally, she doesn't know me as well as she thinks she does. Jennifer paused, and I could almost hear her calculating the potential complications. Are you sure this is the approach you want to take? I'm sure. But Jennifer, I need you to deliver that presentation exactly the way you would for any other candidate. Don't rush through sections, don't skip details, and don't make any special allowances. Understood? Should I prepare for any specific concerns or reactions? Just be ready to take detailed notes. That afternoon, I did something I rarely had time for. I researched my own company from an outsider's perspective. I wanted to see exactly what Madison would have found if she'd done proper due diligence. The results were illuminating. A basic Google search for Meridian Digital Solutions returned our company website, which prominently featured my photo and biography on the leadership page. Below that were articles from TechCrunch, Forbes, and the Seattle Business Journal, most of which mentioned me by name as the founder and CEO. There was even a recent interview I'd done with Harvard Business Review about scaling digital agencies in competitive markets. How had Madison missed all of this? How had she prepared for an interview without looking at the company website? The only explanation was that she'd relied entirely on the job posting and perhaps a quick scan of our LinkedIn page. I pulled up Madison's LinkedIn activity from the past week. She'd shared several articles about career transitions and had posted about her excitement for new challenges in the dynamic world of digital marketing. But there was no indication she'd researched Meridian beyond the most superficial level. This wasn't just carelessness, this was arrogance. Madison had assumed that her Goldman Sachs credentials and her Ivy League education would be enough to impress any, quote, mid-sized tech company. She'd approached this opportunity as if she was doing us a favor, rather than as a candidate who needed to earn the position. I spent the rest of the afternoon making strategic decisions about how to handle the interview. The revelation of my identity would be powerful, but the timing had to be perfect. Too early, and Madison might shut down or become defensive. Too late, and the impact would be lost. I decided on a graduate reveal. Jennifer would present the company overview, including the executive team profiles, but I wouldn't interrupt or explain. If Madison recognized me from the materials, that would be her opportunity to acknowledge the connection. If she didn't, that would tell us something significant about her attention to detail. Then David would conduct his portion of the interview, testing her actual knowledge and capabilities. This would establish whether her confidence was backed by competence or just by credentials. Finally, I would enter the interview as the CEO, not as her sister. Madison would have to process the revelation while maintaining her professional composure and continuing to advocate for herself as a candidate. The plan felt right, but I wanted one more perspective. I called my mentor, Dr. Patricia Nakamura, who'd guided me through the early days of building Meridian. Patricia had founded and sold 2 successful tech companies and now served on several boards. She'd seen every kind of business drama and had a talent for cutting through emotion to reach practical solutions. Patricia, I have a situation that's both personal and professional, and I need an outside perspective. I'm listening. I walked her through the entire scenario, Madison's years of condescension, her application to Meridian, our phone conversation, and my plans for the interview. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Angelica, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What outcome do you actually want from this interview? What do you mean? Do you want to hire Madison? Do you want to reject her? Do you want to teach her a lesson? Do you want her to understand who you really are? Do you want to repair your relationship? Do you want to end it? Because the way you conduct this interview will determine which of those outcomes is possible. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I want her to see me clearly for the first time. I want her to understand that her assumptions about my life and my career have been completely wrong. And after she understands that, then what? I don't know. Then that's what you need to figure out tonight. Because tomorrow, after Madison discovers that her failure sister is actually the CEO of the company she wants to work for, she's going to need to know where she stands with you. Not just as a candidate, but as a sister. Patricia was right. I'd been so focused on the dramatic potential of the revelation that I hadn't thought through the aftermath. What would happen after Madison learned the truth? How would it change our family dynamics? How would it affect her career prospects? How would it affect mine? That evening, I stayed late in my office, not working on presentations or strategy documents, but thinking about relationships and consequences. Through my window, Seattle's lights twinkled like possibilities, each one representing a choice someone had made about their life and career. Madison would arrive tomorrow, expecting to interview with some middle manager at a promising mid-sized company. Instead, she would discover that the sister she'd been patronizing for years was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city. The question wasn't whether she would be shocked. The question was what she would do with that shock, and what I would do with the power to shape what happened next. For the first time in years, I had Madison's future in my hands. The irony was perfect, but the responsibility was enormous. Tomorrow would change everything between us, one way or another. Tuesday morning started with chaos I hadn't anticipated. At 8:47 a.m., 3 hours before Madison's scheduled interview, my phone erupted with a series of texts that made my carefully planned day feel like it was spiraling out of control. Angie, emergency, can you meet me for coffee before my interview? I'm freaking out. I just realized I don't know anyone in Seattle who can give me a reference if they ask. Please, 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 can you help? I know it's last minute, but I really need my sister right now. The Four Seasons lobby in 30 minutes? I stared at the messages while sipping my morning coffee in my office. Madison was panicking, and her panic was threatening to derail the entire scenario I'd orchestrated. If I met her for coffee, there was a chance she'd recognize me later during the interview. If I didn't, she'd show up already rattled and potentially perform poorly, which wouldn't give me the clean test of her assumptions that I wanted. But there was a third option. I could use this panic to my advantage. I texted back, "Can't do coffee, but I'm happy to help over the phone. What's going on?" My phone rang within seconds. Madison's voice was higher than usual, strained with the kind of anxiety I hadn't heard from her since college finals. "Angie, I think I might have made a huge mistake. I was up all night researching this company, and I think it's bigger than I realized. Like, a lot bigger." "Finally, what did you find?" "They have some seriously major clients. Microsoft, Amazon, Nike. Their revenue last year was over $40 million. This isn't some cute startup, Angie. This is a real company with real expectations." I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with something darker. And that's a problem because I may have been a little overconfident about how easy the transition would be. I spent 6 hours last night trying to understand programmatic advertising and customer lifetime value optimization, and I think I made everything worse. I understand less now than I did before I started researching. She was spiraling, and part of me wanted to let her. But I also realized this was the perfect opportunity to gauge exactly how committed Madison was to her own narrative about success and competence. "Madison, you have an MBA from Wharton and 5 years at Goldman Sachs. You're telling me you can't handle a marketing interview? It's not that simple. This digital stuff is like learning a foreign language. Did you know there are 17 different types of conversion tracking? 17! And they all have different applications depending on the customer journey stage. How was I supposed to know that marketing had become this technical? How was she supposed to know? Maybe by doing research before applying for a senior position in an industry she'd never worked in. But I kept that observation to myself. What specifically are you worried about? Everything. What if they ask me to walk through a digital campaign strategy? What if they want me to explain how I'd optimize their current client accounts? What if they ask about attribution modeling or cross-platform analytics? I don't even know what half these terms mean. The panic in her voice was real, but so was something else. Madison was finally confronting the reality that expertise couldn't be faked, that credentials didn't automatically translate across industries, that confidence without competence was just arrogance wearing a business suit. "Madison, you've been telling me for years that marketing is marketing, and that your strategic thinking would transfer anywhere. What changed?" A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I think I might have oversimplified things. This industry moves really fast, and there's a lot of specialized knowledge I don't have." There it was, the first crack in Madison's armor of certainty. She was admitting, maybe for the first time in her life, that she might not be qualified for something she wanted. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know. That's why I need your help. You've been working in tech for years. Can't you give me some insider tips? Or maybe you could make some calls. I bet you know people who know people at Meridian. And there it was again. Even in her moment of panic and self-doubt, Madison was still trying to use connections and shortcuts instead of simply admitting she wasn't prepared. She was asking me to leverage my network to help her get a job at my own company. What kind of calls would you want me to make? Just, put in a good word? Let them know that I'm serious about this transition and that I'm a quick learner? Sometimes these tech companies appreciate personal recommendations more than formal credentials. Personal recommendations? Madison wanted me to recommend her for a position at the company I owned, while she remained completely oblivious to that fact. Madison, what would you do if I said no? Another pause, longer this time. You wouldn't say no. We're sisters. This is important to me. But hypothetically, if I did? Her voice hardened slightly. Angie, I'm flying to Seattle for this interview. I've already turned down 2 other opportunities to focus on this one. I need this to work out, and you're the only person I know who might be able to help. You wouldn't sabotage your own sister, would you? Sabotage. Madison was framing my potential refusal to help as active sabotage. She wasn't asking for my assistance. She was demanding it, and packaging that demand as family loyalty. How exactly would I be sabotaging you by not making phone calls on your behalf? Come on, Angie. Don't be deliberately difficult. You know how these things work. A personal recommendation can make all the difference. And it's not like I'm asking you to lie. I am a quick learner, and I do have valuable experience. I just need someone to help them see past the industry differences. Madison wanted me to help Meridian overlook the fact that she had no relevant experience, no understanding of digital marketing, and no genuine interest in learning the industry from the ground up. What if they decide you're not the right fit based on your qualifications alone? That won't happen if you help me position this correctly. Angie, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, and I realize I may have come across as overconfident. But that's just because I've been so successful in my current field. I'm actually really excited to learn and grow in digital marketing. I just need the right opportunity. Excited to learn and grow. Madison was rewriting her entire approach in real time, transforming from the confident expert who thought digital marketing would be easy, to the humble newcomer eager for mentorship. But she was doing it strategically, as a manipulation technique rather than as genuine self-reflection. Madison, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. If this interview doesn't go well, what will you tell yourself about why it didn't work out? What do you mean? Will you think it's because you weren't qualified? Or because they couldn't see your potential? Or because the industry has unrealistic expectations? Or because you didn't get the right help from your connections? The question hung in the air for a moment. When Madison answered, her voice had a defensive edge. I think that's a pretty unfair question. I'm qualified for this position. I have strategic thinking skills that transfer across industries. If they can't see that, then maybe they're not the kind of forward-thinking company I want to work for anyway. There it was. Even in her moment of panic, even after hours of research that had revealed her lack of knowledge, Madison was already preparing excuses. If the interview went poorly, it wouldn't be because she was unprepared or unqualified. It would be because Meridian wasn't smart enough to recognize her value. So you still think you're the right person for this job? Absolutely, I just think I need to present myself more strategically. That's where you come in. Madison, what if I told you that the best thing I could do for you right now is encourage you to be completely honest in your interview? To admit what you don't know and focus on your willingness to learn? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Angie, that's the kind of advice that works in movies, not in real life. These companies want confidence and competence. If I walk in there talking about what I don't know, they'll eliminate me in the first 5 minutes. And if you walk in there pretending to know things you don't, then I'll get the job and figure it out as I go. That's how successful people operate, Angie. We adapt. We don't sit around waiting until we're perfect before we take opportunities. We don't sit around waiting. Madison was lumping herself into a category of successful people, while implying that anyone who insisted on actual competence was just lacking in ambition or confidence. Okay, Madison, here's what I can do for you. I can't make any phone calls, but I can give you one piece of advice that I think will make a real difference in your interview. Thank you, I knew you'd help me. What is it? Pay attention to the people you're meeting with. Really listen to what they're telling you about the company, about the role, about their expectations. Don't just wait for your turn to talk. Actually hear what they're saying. That's it? That's your big advice? That's it. Madison was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her disappointment. Angie, I was hoping for something more actionable, like specific talking points or insider information about what they're looking for. Trust me on this one, Madison. Pay attention to the people in the room. Fine. I guess that's better than nothing. I should probably go get ready. My interview's at 2 and I want to look perfect. Image matters in these situations. Good luck, Madison. Thanks, Angie. I owe you one. After we hung up, I sat in my office replaying the conversation. Madison's panic had been real, but so had her immediate pivot to manipulation. When confronted with evidence of her own unpreparedness, she hadn't chosen humility or honest self-assessment. She'd chosen to double down on her entitlement and look for ways to game the system. More telling was her assumption that I would automatically help her, regardless of whether she deserved the position. She'd framed my assistance not as a favor, but as a family obligation. And when I'd refused to make calls on her behalf, she'd immediately started preparing excuses for potential failure. At 11 a.m., I called a brief meeting with David and Jennifer to update them on Madison's current state of mind. She's panicking, I told them. She spent last night researching and realized she's in over her head. But instead of adapting her approach, she's looking for shortcuts and already preparing excuses. How do you want us to handle that? Jennifer asked. Exactly as planned. Standard interview, standard questions, standard expectations. If she's rattled, that's information about how she handles pressure. If she tries to bluff her way through technical questions, that's information about her integrity. David nodded. And if she asks about personal connections or mentions having a sister in Seattle Tech, note it in your evaluation but don't engage with it. This interview is about her qualifications for the position, not about her family relationships. At 1:30 p.m., I positioned myself in my office where I could see the elevator bank through my partially open door. At 1:45, I watched Madison step out of the elevator and approach our reception desk. She looked perfect, exactly as she'd intended. Tailored navy suit, professional but not flashy accessories, hair styled in a way that suggested competence and authority. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in corporate spaces, who had never been told she wasn't qualified for anything she wanted. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slightly forced smile she gave our receptionist, the way she checked her phone twice while waiting. The panic from our morning conversation was still there, just hidden beneath layers of professional polish. As I watched her disappear down the hallway toward conference room A, I realized something profound. Madison wasn't just unprepared for this interview. She was unprepared for the possibility that her entire approach to success might be fundamentally flawed. In 30 minutes, that preparation would be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. But first, she would have to sit through Jennifer's complete company presentation, including the executive team profiles that would reveal exactly who had been listening to her panic all morning. The sister she'd called for help was about to become the CEO who would determine her future, and Madison still had no idea what was coming. At exactly 2 p.m., I watched through the security monitor as Jennifer led Madison into conference room A. From my office 3 doors down, I could see Madison's silhouette through the frosted glass, sitting straight-backed in the chair facing the presentation screen. She had no idea that in 15 minutes, her entire understanding of reality was about to shatter. Jennifer began with our standard opening, welcoming Madison and explaining the interview structure. Through my earpiece connected to the room's audio system, I could hear every word, every pause, every shift in tone. We'll start with a comprehensive overview of Meridian Digital Solutions. Jennifer's voice was warm but professional. This will help you understand our company culture, our growth trajectory, and our leadership team. Then David Chen, our VP of Marketing, will discuss the specific role and its requirements. Finally, our CEO will join us to wrap up. That sounds perfect, Madison replied, and I could hear the practiced confidence in her voice. I'm really excited to learn more about Meridian's vision. Jennifer clicked to the first slide, founded in 2019 by visionary entrepreneur Angelica Wells. My photo filled the screen, the professional headshot from our latest annual report taken just 6 months ago. The silence that followed stretched for exactly 7 seconds. I know because I was counting. "Is everything all right, Ms. Wells?" Jennifer asked. "I'm sorry, could you go back to that slide?" Jennifer clicked back. There I was again, smiling confidently from the screen, with my title clearly displayed. Angelica Wells, founder and CEO. "Do you know Ms. Wells?" Jennifer's tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear the curiosity underneath. Another pause. Then Madison's voice, smaller now. She looks familiar. Could you tell me more about her background?" Jennifer proceeded with my complete biography. MIT, summa cum laude. Early career at Amazon and Google. Founded Meridian at 27. Named to Forbes 30 Under 30. Featured in Harvard Business Review. Industry innovator in cross-platform analytics. With each achievement Jennifer listed, I could practically hear Madison's worldview reconstructing itself. The sister she'd called that morning for help, the sister she thought worked in IT support, the sister she'd been patronizing for years. That sister was the founder and CEO of the company she desperately wanted to work for. "Ms. Wells?" Jennifer's voice carried a note of concern. "Would you like some water?" "Yes, please. Thank you." I heard the sound of a water bottle being opened. The pause, as Madison took what I imagined was a long drink. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, but I could detect the underlying tremor. "Please continue with the presentation. I'm very interested in learning about the company's leadership philosophy." Jennifer continued through the rest of the executive team, our company history, our client portfolio, our growth metrics. But I knew Madison wasn't really listening anymore. She was processing, calculating, trying to figure out how to handle what she'd discovered. 25 minutes later, David entered the room for his portion of the interview. This was the technical assessment, the part where Madison's actual qualifications would be tested. "Good afternoon, Madison. I'm David Chen, VP of Marketing. I understand you're interested in our Senior Marketing Director position?" "Yes, absolutely. Though I have to say, learning about Meridian's impressive growth has made me even more excited about the opportunity." Impressive growth. Madison was already adapting her language, trying to sound more informed and engaged than she had been an hour ago. "Excellent. Let's dive into some specifics. Can you walk me through how you'd approach developing a digital marketing strategy for one of our major accounts? Let's say Microsoft." I leaned forward in my chair. This was the moment of truth. Madison knew she was unqualified, but would she admit it or try to bluff her way through? "Well," Madison began, and I could hear her buying time. "Microsoft is obviously a technology leader, so they'd want a strategy that reflects innovation and forward thinking." "Certainly. But can you be more specific about tactics? How would you structure a campaign across our various digital channels?" I would start with a comprehensive analysis of their current market position and identify opportunities for growth through targeted messaging. David was being patient, but I could hear in his tone that Madison's answers were generic corporate speak without any actual substance. "Madison, let me ask a more direct question. How familiar are you with programmatic advertising?" A pause. "I have some familiarity with the concept. Could you explain how you'd implement programmatic buying for a B2B client like Microsoft?" This time the pause was longer. "I think the best approach would be to leverage data-driven insights to optimize targeting parameters." David tried a different approach. "What's your experience with attribution modeling?" "I've worked with various attribution frameworks in my previous role." "Which one specifically?" Another pause. The standard industry models." I could hear David's patience wearing thin. Madison was deflecting every technical question with meaningless buzzwords. She couldn't explain programmatic advertising because she didn't understand it. She couldn't discuss attribution modeling because she'd only learned the term yesterday. "Madison, let me be direct. This position requires hands-on experience with digital marketing tools and strategies. Can you give me one specific example of a digital campaign you've managed from conception to completion?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if the audio feed had cut out. Finally, Madison spoke, and her voice was different. Smaller, more vulnerable. David, I need to be honest with you. My background is in traditional finance and strategic consulting. I don't have direct experience managing digital campaigns, but I'm a quick learner, and I believe my strategic thinking and analytical skills would transfer well to digital marketing. Finally, Madison was being honest about her qualifications. But was it genuine honesty or just a strategic pivot when the bluffing wasn't working? I appreciate your honesty, David said. But this is a senior-level position that requires someone who can hit the ground running. We're looking for someone with proven experience in digital channel management, not someone who's hoping to learn on the job. I understand that, Madison replied, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. But sometimes the best hires are people who bring fresh perspectives from outside the industry. I've been incredibly successful at Goldman Sachs, and I know I could bring that same level of excellence to Meridian. Excellence from Goldman Sachs. Even in her moment of vulnerability, Madison was falling back on her credentials as proof of her worth. Madison, our CEO, will be joining us shortly, but before she does, I want to ask you one final question. Knowing what you know now about the technical requirements of this position, and being honest about your current experience level, why do you think you're the right person for this job? This was it. This was Madison's opportunity to demonstrate genuine self-awareness, to show that she could learn from today's revelations and adjust her approach accordingly. Because, Madison said, and her voice grew stronger, I believe that leadership and strategic thinking matter more than technical knowledge. Technical skills can be learned, but the ability to think strategically and drive results, that's something you either have or you don't. And I've proven I have it. My heart sank. Even after being completely exposed, even after failing every technical question, Madison was doubling down on her belief that her credentials should trump actual competence. I see, David said. Well, our CEO should be here any moment to wrap up. That was my cue. I stood up from my desk, smoothed my blazer, and walked down the hallway to conference room A. Through the frosted glass, I could see Madison's silhouette, still sitting upright, but with a slight slump that hadn't been there an hour ago. I paused with my hand on the door handle. Once I walked into that room, there would be no going back. Madison would have to confront, not just the fact that I was successful, but that I was more successful than she'd ever imagined. She would have to process that revelation, while continuing to advocate for herself as a candidate for my company. More importantly, I would have to decide in real time how to handle this situation. Madison was my sister, but she was also someone who had spent years diminishing my achievements and assumptions about my worth. She was family, but she was also a candidate who had just demonstrated that she valued credentials over competence and wasn't willing to genuinely acknowledge her limitations. I thought about my conversation with Patricia the night before. What outcome do you actually want from this interview? I still wasn't sure, but I was about to find out. I opened the door and stepped into the conference room. Madison was facing away from the door, looking at David, so she didn't see me enter immediately. Jennifer and David both stood as I entered, their expressions carefully neutral. Madison, David said, I'd like you to meet our CEO, Angelica Wells. Madison turned in her chair, and our eyes met for the first time since the anniversary dinner 3 weeks ago. Her face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, shock, and then something I couldn't quite identify. It might have been fear. Hello, Madison, I said calmly, taking the seat directly across from her. Thank you for your interest in Meridian Digital Solutions. Madison opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Angelica, It's fine, I said. You can call me Angie. We are family after all. The word family hung in the air like a challenge. Madison's eyes darted to David and Jennifer, trying to gauge how much they knew about our relationship. I think, Madison said carefully, there might be some conflict of interest here. Why? I asked. Are you not qualified for the position? It was a deliberate trap, and we both knew it. If Madison claimed she was qualified, she'd have to explain why she'd failed every technical question David had asked. If she claimed there was a conflict of interest, she'd be admitting that our family relationship was more important than her professional merits. I just think. Madison started, then stopped. I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. Madison, I said gently, why don't you tell me why you think you'd be a good fit for Meridian Digital Solutions? Pretend we've never met before. Sell me on Madison Wells, the candidate. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with multiple conflicting impulses. Part of her wanted to reference our family relationship, to appeal to my loyalty as her sister. Part of her wanted to maintain the professional facade and pretend this was a normal interview. And part of her, I suspected, wanted to run from the room and never speak to me again. Angelica, she said finally, and the formality felt strange coming from her. I believe I could bring valuable strategic perspective to your team. My experience in high-level consulting and financial analysis has taught me how to identify opportunities and develop comprehensive growth strategies. It was the same pitch she'd been making all afternoon, the same reliance on transferable skills and strategic thinking. She hadn't learned anything from the past hour of revelations. Madison, I said, what do you think I do all day? The question caught her off guard. I'm sorry? What do you think my job entails? What do you think the CEO of a digital marketing company actually does? She blinked several times. You manage the overall strategy and vision for the company. And do you think that strategy and vision require understanding digital marketing? Of course, but do you think I know how programmatic advertising works? Yes. Do you think I understand attribution modeling? Yes. Do you think I can explain the technical requirements of this position because I've actually done this work myself? Madison's face was flushing now. Yes. So when you tell me that technical skills can be learned but strategic thinking can't, what exactly are you suggesting about my qualifications to run this company? The room was completely silent. David and Jennifer were watching this exchange with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Madison's voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. I wasn't suggesting anything about your qualifications. No? I leaned forward slightly. Because it sounds like you're saying that someone with strategic thinking skills, like you, is inherently more valuable than someone with technical expertise. Which would make me, someone who started with technical expertise and built strategic thinking on top of it, somehow inferior to you. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Madison? She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see something shifting in her expression. The polished candidate mask was slipping away, revealing something raw underneath. I meant, she said slowly, that I've been successful in everything I've ever done, and I thought that would be enough. There it was. The closest thing to honesty Madison had offered all day. And now? I asked. Now I don't know what to think about anything. For the first time since this whole situation began, I felt something other than anger or satisfaction. I felt something that might have been sympathy. But sympathy wasn't enough to change the fundamental reality. Madison wasn't qualified for this position, and more importantly, she'd approached it with an arrogance that revealed her complete lack of respect for the work we did here. The question was, what did I do with that reality now that it was laid bare between us? The interview ended 20 minutes later with Madison walking out of conference room A like someone leaving a funeral. I watched through my office window as she crossed the lobby, her confident stride from earlier replaced by the uncertain steps of someone whose entire world had been reorganized without her permission. I didn't immediately return to my office. Instead, I stayed in the conference room with David and Jennifer, needing to process what had just happened through their professional perspectives before I could untangle my personal feelings. Well, David said, closing his portfolio, that was certainly the most interesting interview I've conducted this year. How do you want to handle the evaluation? Jennifer asked. Given the family connection, should we document this differently? It was a fair question. HR protocols existed for situations like this, but none of them had anticipated a scenario where the CEO's sister interviewed for a position while being completely unaware of the family connection. Document it exactly as you would any other interview, I said. Madison's qualifications stand on their own, regardless of our relationship. What was your professional assessment? David was direct. She's not qualified for this position. She lacks basic understanding of digital marketing fundamentals, couldn't answer elementary questions about campaign management, and when pressed on specifics, resorted to buzzwords and deflection. If she were any other candidate, this would be a clear rejection. And beyond the technical qualifications, Jennifer considered this carefully. Her approach was concerning. She seemed to believe that confidence could substitute for competence, and even when confronted with her limitations, she doubled down rather than demonstrating genuine willingness to learn. I nodded. These were the same observations I'd made, but hearing them from my team confirmed that my personal feelings weren't clouding my professional judgment. "There's one more thing," David added. When I asked her about conflict of interest, she immediately suggested that family relationships should influence hiring decisions. That's a red flag from an ethics standpoint. How so? She wasn't concerned about the appearance of impropriety. She was suggesting that family connections should work in her favor. That suggests she's comfortable with nepotism, as long as it benefits her. That observation hit harder than I'd expected. Madison hadn't been worried about fairness. She'd been looking for an advantage. 20 minutes later, I was back in my office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Madison's number. Angelica. Her voice was formal, distant. "Madison, I think we need to talk. Not as CEO and candidate, but as sisters." "Do we?" A pause. "I'm flying back to New York tonight, but I could change my flight. I think there are things we need to say to each other." I considered this. Part of me wanted to let her leave, to process this entire situation at my own pace without having to manage Madison's feelings or reactions. But another part of me recognized that some conversations couldn't be delayed without becoming impossible. "Where do you want to meet?" "Somewhere neutral. Not your office, not my hotel. Maybe that coffee place on Pine Street near the market? I'll be there in an hour." The coffee shop Madison had chosen was deliberately public, the kind of place where emotional conversations had to stay contained. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She'd changed out of her interview suit into jeans and a sweater, looking more like the sister I remembered, and less like the corporate executive she'd become. "I ordered you a latte," she said as I sat down. "I remember you used to drink those in college." I looked at the cup she'd pushed toward me. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant somehow. Madison was acknowledging our shared history, trying to establish common ground. "Thank you." For a few moments we sat in silence, each waiting for the other to begin. Madison was the one who finally spoke. "I keep trying to figure out when everything changed between us, and I think I've been asking the wrong question." "What do you mean?" "I've been wondering when you became successful, when you built this company, when you became someone I didn't recognize. But the real question is, when did I stop seeing you clearly?" It wasn't what I'd expected her to say. I'd prepared for defensiveness, for excuses, for attempts to minimize what had happened. I hadn't prepared for self-reflection. "What do you think the answer is?" Madison stared into her coffee for a moment. "I think it started in college. You were always so quiet about your achievements. You'd get perfect grades, win academic awards, land amazing internships, but you never talked about them. Meanwhile, I was broadcasting every success, every opportunity, every accomplishment. And I think I started assuming that if something was important, you would have told me about it. So when you didn't talk about your career, I assumed it wasn't worth talking about." She paused, then continued. "But that wasn't fair, was it? You weren't being modest or secretive. You were just being yourself. And I never bothered to actually ask about your life because I was too busy talking about mine." I felt something shift inside me, like a knot loosening. "Madison, you didn't just not ask about my life, you actively dismissed it. At family dinners, at holidays, whenever work came up, you'd redirect the conversation or make jokes about my computer stuff." "I know." Her voice was quiet. "I thought I was being protective, steering conversations away from topics that might make you feel inadequate compared to my career. But I was actually being condescending." "Yes, you were." Madison flinched slightly, but she didn't argue. The anniversary dinner was the worst, wasn't it? When I offered to get you an entry-level position at Goldman Sachs? That was pretty bad. I was showing off for Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia. I wanted them to see how successful I was, how well I was doing, and I used your career as a foil to make mine look better. Why? Madison was quiet for a long moment. Because I was insecure. Because even though I was making good money and climbing the corporate ladder, I always felt like I was performing success rather than actually achieving it. And you always seemed so content, so genuinely happy with your choices. It made me question whether all my achievements actually meant anything. This was not the conversation I'd expected to have. Madison was being more honest than I'd seen her be in years, maybe ever. So instead of examining your own feelings about success, you decided I must be unsuccessful? Exactly. It was easier to believe you were settling for less than to consider that maybe you'd found something better. I took a sip of my latte, buying time to process what Madison was saying. How long have you felt like you were performing success rather than achieving it? Since I started at Goldman Sachs, maybe longer. I kept waiting for the moment when I'd feel like I'd made it, when the external validation would translate into internal satisfaction. But it never happened. Every promotion just made me more anxious about maintaining my position. Every achievement just raised the bar for the next one. Madison, you're incredibly successful by any reasonable measure. Why wasn't that enough? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because I chose a definition of success that required constant external validation. I needed other people to see my achievements, to acknowledge them, to be impressed by them. Your success doesn't need an audience, does it? What do you mean? You built a company because you wanted to solve problems and create value. I climbed a corporate ladder because I wanted status and recognition. Your success is intrinsic, mine is completely dependent on other people's opinions. I hadn't thought about it in those terms before, but Madison was right. I'd built Meridian because I'd seen opportunities in the digital marketing space, because I'd enjoyed the technical challenges, because I'd wanted to create something meaningful. The recognition and financial success had been byproducts, not primary goals. Is that why you applied for the position at Meridian? For external validation? Madison shook her head. No, that's what's so ironic. I applied because I was burned out on performing. I thought moving to a smaller company, working in a different industry, might help me rediscover what I actually enjoyed about work. But you approached it the same way you approached everything else. You assumed your credentials would be enough, you didn't do proper research, you expected special treatment because of family connections. Yes. Even when I was trying to escape performance-based success, I was still performing. We sat in silence for a moment, watching other customers come and go. The late afternoon light was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the coffee shop. Madison, can I ask you something? Of course. If I had hired you, if I had overlooked your lack of qualifications because we're sisters, what do you think would have happened? She considered this carefully. I would have failed. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And when I did, it would have hurt your company and damaged our relationship even more than this situation has. And what about the other qualified candidates who didn't get the position because I gave it to my unqualified sister? Madison's face flushed. I hadn't thought about them. There are people who have spent years developing expertise in digital marketing, who understand the technical requirements, who could actually contribute to our team from day one. By expecting special treatment, you were asking me to be unfair to them. You're right. Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. I was asking you to compromise your integrity for my convenience. Yes, you were. Another silence, longer this time. When Madison spoke again, her voice was different. Steadier, but also sadder. Angie, I need to apologize for more than just this week. I need to apologize for years of not seeing you, not listening to you, not respecting what you were building. I turned you into a supporting character in my story, instead of recognizing that you were the protagonist of your own. Thank you for saying that. I also need to apologize for calling you this morning asking for help. I was trying to use our relationship to get an unfair advantage, and that was wrong. Madison, Why didn't you research the company properly? Why didn't you look at the website, read about the leadership team? She looked embarrassed. Because I assumed it didn't matter. I thought my credentials would speak for themselves, and that the details of the company were secondary. I was approaching it like a traditional corporate interview where what matters is your pedigree and your ability to network. And now? Now I realize that different industries have different values, different expectations, different definitions of competence. And that assuming I could transfer my success without learning new skills was arrogant and naive. I felt some of the anger I'd been carrying for weeks start to dissipate. Madison's apologies felt genuine, her self-reflection seemed real, and her acknowledgement of her mistakes was more complete than I'd dared to hope for. But there was still one more thing I needed to know. Madison, what happens now? With us, I mean. She looked at me directly for the first time since we'd sat down. I'd like to try to build a relationship with the sister I never bothered to get to know. But I understand if you need time, or if you don't want that. What would that look like? I don't know. Maybe we start with actually talking to each other instead of talking at each other. Maybe I ask about your work and actually listen to the answers. Maybe we figure out how to be sisters as adults instead of repeating the patterns we established as kids. And what about your career? What are you going to do now? Madison smiled for the first time since I'd entered the coffee shop. I'm going to figure out what I actually want to do with my life instead of what I think I should want. Today was a wake-up call. I've been successful at things that don't fulfill me, and I've been measuring my worth by standards that don't actually matter to me. That sounds like a good place to start. Angie, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you happy? I mean, genuinely happy with your life and your choices? I thought about my company, my team, the problems we solved, the value we created, the recognition we'd earned. I thought about my apartment with its view of the Sound, my small circle of close friends, my quiet satisfaction with what I'd built. Yes, I said, I really am. Madison nodded slowly. I think that's what I've been missing. Not the external markers of success, but the internal sense of satisfaction. I want what you have. What do you think I have? Purpose, authenticity, the courage to build something meaningful instead of just climbing someone else's ladder. As we left the coffee shop, Madison turned to me one last time. Angie, I know this doesn't change anything about the interview. I know I wasn't qualified, and I know you can't hire me. But thank you for being honest with me today. I needed to hear these things, even if they were hard to hear. Madison, for what it's worth, I think you'll figure it out. You're smart, you're driven, and now you're being honest with yourself about what you actually want. That's a good foundation for whatever comes next. She hugged me then, briefly but genuinely. I'll call you, she said. Not because I need something, but because I want to know how you're doing. As I watched her walk away, heading back to her hotel to catch her flight to New York, I realized that the conversation we'd just had was the most honest exchange Madison and I had ever shared. It had taken a professional disaster and years of accumulated resentment to get us there, but maybe that's what it had required. The sister who had walked into my office that afternoon was not the same person who had just hugged me goodbye. And maybe I wasn't the same person either. But whether this change would last, whether we could build a genuine relationship going forward, remained to be seen. For now, it was enough that we'd finally started talking to each other, instead of past each other. The real test would come in the weeks and months ahead, when the shock of today's revelations faded and we had to figure out how to actually be sisters to each other. 6 months later, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when Sarah knocked on my door with an expression I'd learned to recognize. She had news that would either be very good or very complicated. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "No appointment, but she says she's your sister." Madison stood in my lobby looking completely different from the polished executive who had walked into my building for that disastrous interview. Gone was the power suit, replaced by dark jeans, a simple blouse, and a confidence that seemed genuine rather than performed. But the biggest change was in her eyes. They held a clarity that hadn't been there before. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said as I approached. "I was in Seattle for a client meeting, and thought I'd take a chance that you had a few minutes." Client meeting. That was new. "Of course. Come up to my office." As we rode the elevator, I noticed Madison looking around with genuine interest, rather than the calculating assessment she'd done during her interview. She was seeing the space for what it was, not evaluating it for what it could do for her. "The company looks like it's grown since I was here last," she observed. "We just expanded into the Portland market, opened a satellite office there last month." "That's incredible, Angie. Really incredible." We settled into the comfortable chairs by my office window, the same view of Elliott Bay stretching out before us. Madison seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "So tell me about this client meeting," I said. Madison's face lit up in a way that surprised me. "I started my own consulting practice 3 months ago. Small business strategy and financial planning for entrepreneurs. Nothing fancy, but it turns out I really love working with people who are building something from scratch." "How did that happen?" "Remember what I said about figuring out what I actually wanted to do instead of what I thought I should want? Well, it took me about 3 months of soul-searching to realize that the parts of my job I enjoyed most were the problem-solving conversations, not the corporate ladder climbing." Madison pulled out her phone and showed me a simple website. Madison Wells Strategic Consulting, in clean, understated font. No corporate buzzwords, no inflated claims, just a clear description of services and some client testimonials. My first client was actually someone I met in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. She was stressed about the financial projections for her bakery expansion, and I ended up helping her restructure her business plan. She referred me to 2 other small business owners, and it grew from there. "That's amazing, Madison. How does it feel?" "Completely different from anything I've ever done. I'm working with people who actually need my help, solving real problems that matter to them. And the funny thing is, I'm making about half what I made at Goldman Sachs, but I've never been happier with my work." This was not the Madison I'd grown up with, the one who measured everything by salary and status. This person seemed to have found something she'd been searching for without realizing it. "What made you decide to take the leap?" Madison was quiet for a moment, looking out at the water. "A few things. That conversation we had in the coffee shop was part of it, realizing that I'd been performing success instead of achieving it. But the real catalyst was something that happened about a month after I got back to New York." "What happened?" "I was in a partners meeting at Goldman, listening to everyone discuss quarterly numbers and client acquisition strategies, and I realized I wasn't just bored. I was actively miserable. I was sitting in a room full of brilliant, successful people, discussing work that generated millions in revenue, and all I could think about was how none of it mattered to me personally." She paused, then continued. "That night I called Mom and Dad and actually told them about the interview here, about discovering who you really were, about how wrong I'd been about everything. And Mom said something that stuck with me." "What did she say?" "She said, 'Madison, maybe it's time you figured out what success means to you instead of what it means to everyone else.'" Coming from Mom, who's always been so proud of traditional achievements, that hit me hard. I was surprised. "Mom said that?" "She did. And then she told me something I never knew, that she'd always worried about you working so much and never talking about your job, but that when she saw your picture in that Seattle Business Journal article last year, she realized you'd been protecting your happiness by keeping it private." "Mom saw the Business Journal article?" Madison smiled. "Angie, they've been quietly collecting every article about you and Meridian for years. Dad has a whole folder on his computer. They just didn't want to make a big deal about it because they knew how much you valued your privacy." This revelation hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd spent years thinking my parents didn't understand or value what I'd built, when they'd actually been respecting my boundaries while celebrating my success in their own way. They know about Meridian's growth, about your industry recognition, about everything. Mom said they didn't bring it up at family dinners because they could tell you didn't want that kind of attention. Why didn't they ever say anything? Because they know you, Angie. They know you're not motivated by external recognition, and they didn't want to turn your achievements into performance pieces for family entertainment. I felt a wave of guilt about my assumptions. While I'd been resenting my family for not acknowledging my success, they'd been quietly proud and deliberately respectful of my privacy. "Madison, I had no idea." Neither did I, until I started actually asking questions instead of just talking about myself. It turns out our family has been having much more thoughtful conversations when I wasn't dominating them with my career updates. She laughed, but it was self-aware rather than bitter. The funny thing is, once I stopped needing to be the center of attention, I started learning so much more about everyone. Did you know Dad has been volunteering at a financial literacy nonprofit for the past 2 years? Or that Mom has been taking photography classes and actually has some amazing landscape shots? I didn't know any of that. Because we never asked. We were so busy managing our own images that we weren't actually connecting with each other. Madison stood and walked to my window, looking out at the city spread below. You know what's really ironic? The client meeting I had today was with a tech startup. They're developing an app for small business inventory management, and they needed help structuring their financial projections for investor meetings. How did that go? Really well. But here's the thing. I had to explain to them that I wasn't the right person to advise them on digital marketing strategy. I told them they needed someone with actual expertise in that area, not just general business consulting. She turned back to face me. A year ago, I would have pretended I could handle the marketing strategy too, even though I had no idea what I was talking about. Today I referred them to a specialist and felt good about giving them honest advice. That's growth. It is, and it feels so much better than pretending to know everything. Madison returned to her chair. Angie, I need to tell you something else. I've been going to therapy. Really? Yeah. I realized that a lot of my need for external validation came from deeper issues about self-worth and family dynamics. It's been really helpful to understand why I've always felt like I needed to prove myself. What have you learned? A lot about how we develop our definitions of success based on childhood patterns. I was always the achiever in the family, the one who got attention for accomplishments. You were the quiet one, the one who got attention for being thoughtful and considerate. So I learned to chase achievements, and you learned to find satisfaction in intrinsic value. It was an insightful observation, and it explained a lot about how we developed such different approaches to success. The problem was, Madison continued, I never learned how to value my own work without external recognition, so I kept chasing bigger and bigger achievements, hoping they'd eventually make me feel successful internally. And now I'm learning to find satisfaction in work that matters to me, regardless of whether anyone else is impressed by it. My therapy helped me realize that the approval I was seeking from others was really approval I needed to give myself. We talked for another hour, covering everything from her new business to our family dynamics, to her relationship with work and success. It was the kind of conversation we'd never had before, genuine, reflective, and free from the competitive undercurrents that had always characterized our interactions. As Madison was getting ready to leave, she stopped at my office door. Angie, I want to thank you for that interview 6 months ago. Thank me? Madison, it was a disaster. It was exactly what I needed. If you had hired me out of family loyalty, I would have failed eventually, and I never would have been forced to examine what I actually wanted from my career. Getting rejected, getting exposed for being unprepared and entitled, was the wake-up call I'd needed for years. I'm glad something good came out of it. Something better than good. That interview changed the entire trajectory of my life. I'm doing work I love. I have genuine relationships with my clients. And I finally understand what you meant when you talked about finding satisfaction in your work itself, rather than in other people's reactions to it. After Madison left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation we just had. The sister who had visited me today was someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, someone whose company I sought out rather than endured. The competitive dynamics that had defined our relationship for decades seemed to have dissolved. More importantly, Madison had found something that had been missing from her life for years. A sense of purpose that came from within, rather than from external validation. She was building something meaningful on her own terms, just like I had done with Meridian. That evening, I called my parents. It was the first time I'd initiated a family conversation in months. Angie! Mom's voice was warm with surprise. What a nice surprise. How are things at Meridian? Really good, Mom. We just opened our Portland office and we're looking at expanding into Denver next year. That's wonderful, honey. Your father and I are so proud of what you've built. For the first time, I didn't deflect or change the subject. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Madison told us about her visit today. She said you two had a really good talk. We did. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Madison said you and Dad have been following Meridian's growth in the press. Is that true? There was a pause. Then Mom's voice was softer. Oh, honey, we've been so proud of you. We just never wanted to make a big deal about it because we know how much you value your privacy. But yes, we've saved every article, every mention. Your father even framed that Forbes piece about young entrepreneurs. I felt tears starting to form. I had no idea. I thought you didn't understand what I did. Angie, we may not understand all the technical aspects of your work, but we understand success when we see it. We understand integrity and hard work and building something meaningful. You've done all of that. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because we know you, sweetheart. We know you don't need our validation to know your own worth. And we were afraid that if we made a big fuss about your achievements, it might change something about who you are. What do you mean? You've always been motivated by internal satisfaction rather than external recognition. We didn't want to accidentally train you to work for our approval instead of your own fulfillment. I was crying now, understanding for the first time that my family's silence hadn't been dismissal. It had been respect. Mom, I love you. And I want to start talking more about all of our lives, not just work stuff, but everything. We'd love that, honey. We really would. After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at Seattle's evening lights. The city looked different somehow, full of possibility and connection rather than just opportunity. 6 months ago, Madison's interview had felt like a confrontation that would either destroy our relationship or force a reckoning. It had turned out to be both and neither. The confrontation had destroyed our old relationship, the one based on competition and assumption and performance. But it had forced a reckoning that allowed us to build something new. Madison had found work that fulfilled her. I had discovered that my family's love and pride had been there all along, expressed in ways I hadn't recognized. And we'd all learned how to have genuine conversations instead of performing versions of ourselves. The morning Madison had applied to work at my company, I'd been focused on the irony of her wanting to join the dead-end career she'd mocked. But the real irony was different. In trying to escape performance-based success, Madison had finally found authentic achievement. In defending my company from someone I thought didn't understand its value, I discovered that the people who mattered most had understood its value all along. Success, I realized, wasn't just about building something meaningful. It was about sharing that meaning with people who could see it clearly, who could celebrate it without needing to own it or diminish it. For the first time in years, I felt like I had both kinds of success: the professional satisfaction I'd worked so hard to build, and the family connections I thought I'd have to sacrifice to achieve it. Madison had been right about one thing during her interview. Sometimes the best hires are people who bring fresh perspectives. She just hadn't realized that sometimes the fresh perspective comes not from joining a new company, but from finally seeing your own life clearly. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.